Welcome to video 3 in the series on child abduction, and I want to thank you for your support and for the comments, but one must remember that we're only doing this because there are children in distress. My journey began when I was just trying to help one mum rescue one child, and when we started publishing articles, we realized that this is bigger than Ben-Hur. So I just want to focus on one comment that came through on video 1, and that was a woman who said, "My daughter had her 3 children taken from her without valid reason. She fought for 4 years to get them back. They were physically and sexually abused in foster care. She got them back by sheer determination and strong maternal instinct." So I just want to re-emphasize that this series is not about custody battles or vengeful partners trying to get at each other. This is about serious sexual abuse cases where there is evidence of sexual abuse or physical abuse. And so we're focusing on that, but of course there's a big picture to this, and it leads out into a much bigger story, which I hope we will get to through the series. In video 2, I did intersecting stories and impossible denials. And so in video 3, I'm going to do discrediting a good protective parent. And in this specific episode, I'm going to focus on protective mums and pedophile fathers. And I will cover protective dads in another episode. So one must remember that pedophiles are both men and women. And I explained that in video 2. So I will be covering in another episode signs to look for when a child is being abused, either as a baby or when the kid is starting to talk and starting to reveal things. And many children disclosed that they had received death threats, and some very brave children did speak out. And then if they're not trusted, they're not believed, they will stop speaking out. And then you won't know what abuse is happening. What I discovered is when we published 1 or 2 stories and what I'd learned from this one wonderful protective mum, other protective parents contacted me and said, "Oh my God, this is happening to me." And so from seeing a number of cases coming in, I could discern patterns developing. So let's get to discrediting a protective parent, or could call it trashing a good mum. It seems that in many cases, the pedophile, the abuser, drugs the protective mum, drugs the protective parent, puts them out, and then they've got a free, clear run at abusing the child. This seemed to be a pattern that had evolved from many cases that came through, and that was protective mums were suffering from fatigue issues. They would go to the doctor wondering why they couldn't wake up in the morning. And another complaint was suffering migraines. And this could have been side effect of drugs. And it will include date rape drugs or whatever it might include, fentanyl. Another factor that came through was that often the pedophile has paraphernalia, the ropes, cages, and many kids have described being tied up, being put in cages. The other major tactic is that the pedophile is planning for D-Day, and that is Discovery Day. If that happens, then a whole set of things get put into action. And, I just wonder, when I started hearing all these tricks, it almost seems that the pedophiles have a kind of a handbook. And if this happens, that happens, you do this, do that. This is being acknowledged in a German investigation, that they give each other tips and tricks, how to abuse children, how to avoid being caught, how to, what happens if you're caught.
Beruhigungsmittel man Kinder besonders effektiv gefügig machen kann, sie zu missbrauchen. Chat-Teilnehmer werden darin bestärkt, wenn sie noch Zweifel haben, ihre eigenen Neigungen auszuleben, und erhalten Ratschläge.
So in preparation for this D-Day, this Discovery Day, the pedophile, if he feels that there are suspicions of his behavior, he will start acting in a way to discredit the mum. This is known as gaslighting, and this is when someone psychologically manipulates someone into questioning their own sanity. And this can be done by moving objects and putting them back where they were, phoning friends and family and saying, oh, she's acting a little bit crazy, and even phoning the doctor and suggesting that she be on some sort of medication. So if the pedophile is caught or the child speaks up, then the wheels start rolling into action. And the pedophile will immediately start accusing the protective mum for being delusional, psychotic, phoning up the relatives, saying there's something wrong with her, or it could be, she's emotionally abusing the kid, or she's coaching the kid to do whatever. And also there's the accusation of alienating. So there's several techniques that come out, but often in the case, if there's a disclosure, the pedophile will, within 2-3 weeks, go straight to family court, file for custody, and this forces the process into court, or any investigations that are happening fall by the wayside because now it becomes a court matter. And we'll discuss that in another episode. There's a second scenario that may emerge, and that is if there's a disclosure from the Child Protection Department and the police or whoever might then get involved. And that is when, in some of these serious abuse cases that we've been investigating, that is when the pedophile passes the baton to the Child Protection Departments. And the Child Protection Departments use exactly the same tactics as the pedophile in trashing a good mum and discrediting a good protective parent. Before I get into the detail here, let me go into the statistics. So several decades ago, when child protection got involved, there were usually 3 reasons they did, and that was sexual abuse, neglect, and physical abuse. And it was about third, and emotional abuse was very, very limited. There were a few cases, but as time progressed, it is now emotional abuse is the prime reason why children seem to be removed. In one statistic on the government website, it's 59%. And one wonders, how do you even prove emotional abuse? So what is emotional abuse? And just looking at one of the department's websites, rejecting is making the child feel worthless, isolating is cutting the child off from normal social experiences and friendships. Terrorizing is verbal assaults, bullying, etc. Ignoring, that is stifling the child's emotional growth. Corrupting is reinforcing destructive behavior, etc. But again, here I say put a mirror up. And when you do that, the protective parent is being accused of emotionally abusing the child. But it's in fact, when you put the mirror up, it's the child department that becomes the abuser. And they start emotionally abusing the child. Because if you look at this again, making the child feel worthless, well, they've disrupted the child's life and worth. Isolating, they specifically now cutting the protective parent and the protective mum from their normal social experiences. Terrorizing, it is for absolutely sure these kids are frightened of breaking the rules. They are not allowed to say certain things at supervised visits because now the protective parent is maybe given an hour a week. I know a specific case where love notes between mum and child were not allowed. So they were terrorizing, bullying, frightening these children, ignoring. They're stifling emotional growth. They're breaking a natural bond between their mum or their dad, and they're reinforcing destructive behavior. The sheer fact of removing and breaking of the family is a destructive behavior. All the cases I know of, it is the child department that is the emotional abuser. So now I want to go through a couple of tactics and wordage, because now they have separated that child, and if it's a family court, they may have sent that child back to live with the abusive parent. And with the child protection departments, we are talking about where a child department says, this mum is no longer a good mum. She's a bad mother and cannot be with her child, and we need to supervise their contact. So I'll just go through some of the trashing tactics by the protection departments. The department might write something like, concerns for the mother's mental health, and she may be suffering from a psychotic disorder. Or there's something like this, there's a sufficient cause to believe the mother suffers from delusions and that her child has been abused, and we fear this may impact the mental health of the child. And they too will get a psychologist or a psychiatrist to write a mental health report. And there seems to be a symbiotic relationship between the social workers, the psychiatrists, and the psychologists providing these reports that favor what they want said. And I just hear that again and again and again. They will also accuse the mum for coaching. That becomes more difficult when the child's disclosed to a mandatory reporter and the mum doesn't know what the abuse has been. And of course, this parent alienation syndrome, where there's the accusation that one parent is trying to alienate the child from the other. But as soon as it gets to court, maybe we should call it judicial alienation syndrome. What the court is doing, they are alienating the child from the protective parent. There could be another accusation is that the mum is fixated about her false allegations. The mother has a fixated view and is therefore at risk of emotionally abusing the child. But in fact, if you shine up the mirror again, it is the department that has the fixated view. There's another accusation for removing a child, and that is pressuring and leading. The mother pressured her child to disclose the abuse, and the mum was just being protective and said to the child, look, you need to speak up. Okay, maybe that's leading or pressuring, but the important thing is it's an admission that the child was abused. This whole emotional abuse thing is so deceptive. The mother has a negative impact of her child by causing the child to be distressed at times. Yes, when the child and the mum meet, the child's extremely distressed, and so it's blamed on the mum. Obviously, they're distressed. They've been separated. They've been torn apart. It's another accusation, emotional incapacity. The mother is now unable to meet the emotional needs of the child at this time. She's fighting, a little bit teary, suffering trauma. No, she's not capable of meeting the needs of a child. So let the government meet the needs of the child. All these reports, it seems like mothering instincts become a negative. There seems to be no recognition that in a mother's DNA is the instinct to protect and nurture at all costs. I was a wildlife cameraman for a time, and you saw mums and dads fighting to their death to protect their offspring. So as soon as you do that, start fighting to be with your children, this becomes a negative. And the child department will use that against the parent. There's also discrediting, anything defamatory that can be brought up by other people. And that is, the mum's a sex worker, the mum's on drugs, anything. Doesn't matter if it's true or false. And of course, then there's isolation. In youth court, the parent can go in but is not allowed support. And if you can split the family, even better, because family is a strong unit. But as soon as you split the family and you start isolating the protective parent, it's 10 times harder for that protective parent to see justice. So I hope it made sense, me going through some of this detail. But what I wasn't expecting in this is that the whole landscape is so splintered and damaged. So when you go to court, the courts are deciding on how to tear these families apart, the children's court, the youth court. Family court is just, these battles, vengeful battles. So when it comes to this child protection business, it's about breaking loving bonds. And I'm not talking about cases where there's a desperate need for children to be looked after. I'm talking about these cases where there is serious sexual assault and it's not being acknowledged, and children have been denied justice. And so we're dealing with this culture of divide and conquer, separation, tearing apart of loving relationships. This is what we're dealing with, and so it filters down. And even those people that are helping try correcting this are having to deal with this splitting, divide and conflict. And so it's quite hard to get unity and to get a spirit of healing in all this, because we understand that 90% of abusers have generally been abused. And it's the same thing that if you tear a child from a mother, it's more difficult for that child to become a good mother. And so you've created cycles after cycles of a dysfunctional society. And it's good business because you're creating more and more clients as these families get torn apart. So the whole aspect, the whole vision of child protection seems to be completely in the wrong direction. And so as we go through it, we will start to discover what we're dealing with and maybe the solutions and how to heal from this, both collectively and individually. So anyway, I say thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.